Today's session will be our founder's guide to the Iterative application. All right, let's do a quick dive into who we are. Iterative is a YC-style accelerator focused on Southeast Asia. If you remember anything about Iterative, remember these 3 points here. First one, we invest up to $500,000 upfront, which means if you're accepted into the program today, we send you the money today, and it's yours to do whatever you want with it. Most of our founders wait until the program to figure out how to use their money, but it's your money. You can decide how and when you want to use it. Second thing, no program fees or clawbacks. Once we send you the money, it's yours. We don't ask for any of it back for any reason at any time. Once the money hits your account, it's yours. And the third thing is we actually believe that the funding is the least valuable thing that we can offer founders. With this investment, you also are accepted into our Accelerator program. During the program, you'll receive 3 months of targeted growth and fundraising support. You'll work weekly with Sue Ken and Brian and the rest of our visiting partners, all of whom have been founders before. And the 3-month program culminates in a demo day to a network of over 400 investors. Since Iterative started in 2020, we have raised $65 million across 2 funds, invested in more than 100 companies and over 200 founders. And our Iterative portfolio companies have gone on to successfully raise over 168 million and are collectively now worth over 1.2 billion. We have 12 days left until our application deadline on the 24th of June. If you think Iterative could help you accelerate your startup's growth, we invite you to apply as soon as possible. On to a little bit more about our visiting partners. So as I said, a large portion of our program's value comes from the guidance and mentorship that founders receive from our visiting partners. And as I mentioned, all of our partners have been founders before. Only people who have been in your shoes as founders can truly understand and help you navigate all the different nuances and unique aspects of the startup journey. And so we really believe that this is an important non-negotiable part of the program that sets us apart from other programs in the region. Visiting partners help our founders stay focused, accountable, and efficient. They work with founders weekly to clear the founders' biggest blockers, solve their most pressing problems, and help them achieve 3 to 5% growth every week. Visiting partners change every batch, but some that we've had in the past include Aaron Yip, co-founder of ISA, a Thailand-based startup that automates immigration, hiring, and compliance. Aaron was previously head of innovation strategy at House, and it was valued at $4 billion during his time there. We also have Chinmay Chauhan, co-founder of BukuWarung, which was part of YCS20. BukuWarung provides financial infrastructure to 60 million MSMEs across Indonesia. And Chinmay has helped grow the company to 400 people. He's helped raise 80 million in funding. Before BukuWarung, he was running product teams at Carousel and Grab. We also have Jessica Chow, director of Clinical Innovation Center at the University of California, and she leads our healthcare investments. Previously, she was co-founder of Healtho, a consumer health information company, and she has extensive experience guiding and mentoring startups. Founders who speak to her during the interview process have consistently told us that talking to Jessica was the thing that made them really want to get accepted into the program. So Jessica is delivering value right from the beginning. Sean Lowe is another one of our visiting partners. He's co-founder of LXA, a fintech company focused on the mortgage market. He was previously co-founder of Better.com, which focused on home ownership services. During his time at Better.com, he helped raise over 900 million, and it was valued at 7 billion. And the last person that I'll share right now is Tessa Wayana, co-founder of Xendit, the $1 billion Indonesian fintech unicorn. So these are just a few of the visiting partners that we have in our community. Each batch will have between 5 to 7 visiting partners who work closely with founders, as I've said. And our upcoming batches lineup is looking pretty sharp. You'll see some of these faces, and you'll see some new faces as well. And I think we should be releasing those very soon. Okay, moving on to our application process. So the title of this slide pretty much sums up the process. It's a very straightforward and simple process. One application, 2 calls, and 1 yes. So we have an online application form on our website. As mentioned before, definitely encourage everybody here to use the link that June dropped into the chat and that we'll share in the email to fast track your application in our review process. Founders submit their application to us. Every single application that we receive is reviewed by a human being, and it's usually more than one human being. If your application passes this first review, you proceed to the next stage, which is a 30-minute call with one of our venture partners. A venture partner is somebody on the Iterative team or somebody who is a founder from our community who has successfully gone through the process already. And the goal of this call is to really learn more about your startup and who you are as a founder. No pitch is needed. It's very conversational. You pass this first call and you advance to the final call, which is a 30-minute conversation with Brian or Sue Ken. Again, it's very conversational, no pitch is needed. Brian and Sue Ken will ask you questions to learn more about the problem that you're trying to solve, your business, and really just to learn more about who you are as a founder and how you think. Iterative is not consensus driven, which means only one general partner, only Brian or Sue Ken, need to decide they want to invest. This whole process typically takes about 2 weeks. Now that we're in crunch time with the application just around the corner on the 24th, this process is even shorter right now as we've, cleared schedules and we're reviewing and interviewing to get through as many applications as there are. The last thing that I will say about the application process is we are always looking for a reason to say yes to you. We're always looking for a reason to invest, not a reason to say no. And so that is the mindset that we go into the application review process with. All right, moving on to who we look for. So the way that we assess whether we can believe in founders and whether they are capable is primarily by evaluating 3 different factors. And we'll take these one at a time. So the first one is, do the founders do what they say they're going to do consistently? So consistent execution, easy to say, but really hard to do. What does this look like and why does it matter to us? So one example that I'll give you is our program is designed around 1-week sprints. This means that every week, Suken, Brian, and the rest of our visiting partners each meet with founders individually. During these one-on-one office hours, the founder and their lead partner discuss what the founder's biggest problems are, what their biggest blockers are that week. They decide on a plan, and then it's the founder's job to execute and get the job done that week. The next week, they meet again for the one-on-one office hours, and the best founders are the ones that said, last week, I said I was going to do X, Y, and Z to get 5% more users. I did X, Y, and Z. If they've reached their target, then the conversation is about figuring out what works specifically and doing more of that. If they didn't reach their target, they work on figuring out why they didn't reach their target and debugging what happened. In both of these scenarios, the catalyst for this quick progression is that the founder did what they said they were going to do. The thing about consistent execution that is particularly challenging is before you commit to doing something, you have to think very carefully about how you're going to do that and have a good plan for doing it. And we find that the founders who are structured thinkers and good problem solvers are particularly good at this. The second one is a little bit more straightforward. Is the founder convincing? Founders need to convince a lot of people to do a lot of things all the time. They need to convince people to work for them. They need to convince people to use their product. They need to convince people like Sukan and Brian to give them money. So being convincing is a super critical part of being a founder, something that we look for as well. The last thing that I'll call out here is we found founders who are internally motivated, that is motivated by solving the problem that they've set out to solve, learning as much as they can about their industry or how to build a startup, tend to do better and be more resilient than founders who are externally motivated by things like making money, becoming famous, et cetera. So these are the three things that we tend to look for when we're evaluating founders. Moving on to the types of startups that we look for. So we don't have a lot of rules, but we do have two that are pretty hard rules for us. The first one is we are a Southeast Asia focused fund, which means we primarily invest in companies where at least one founder is based in Southeast Asia or the company is majority focused on a Southeast Asian market. And the second rule is we look for founders who are full-time working on their startups. Sukan said this recently, and I thought it was a really good way of saying this. Founders need to believe in their idea enough to quit their job and invest full-time in it, not believe in it only if we believe in it. So these are typically our two hard rules. Like most rules, there are exceptions to both of these because, you know, we understand that circumstances happen and things like that, but typically we follow these rules. We are also both industry and growth stage agnostic. We invest in very early to late stage startups. And when we say very early, this could be as early as the concept stage. We've invested in just a concept in the past, and we will continue to in the future. For companies in the concept stage, we look for the same things that we look for with companies in later stages, which are two things. One, is a startup solving an important problem? And two, do the founders have the ability to solve that problem? I talked about the second question in the previous slide. And then let me address the first question in the next slide. Is the startup solving an important problem? So startups exist to solve a problem. How big that problem is will dictate the market size. For a startup to be successful and venture backable, we think it must tackle an important problem. How to tell if a problem is important? We actually answer this by asking and answering two other questions. One, how many people have that problem? And two, how painful is that problem for each individual person? If many people have the problem and the problem is very painful for all those people, we see this as a very large market. If few people have the problem and the problem is not that painful, it's only an annoying problem, we see this as a very small market. Those are pretty straightforward. The next two are a little bit more nuanced. So if a few people have a very painful problem, we actually see this as a fairly big market because we think that those people are probably more likely to seek out a solution and spend money to solve their problem since it's painful. If many people have a problem that is only annoying, all those people, even though they're a large quantity, they will probably be less likely to care about solving their problem because it's just a minor annoyance. So for us, the greater the people, the greater the pain, the bigger the market. Moving on to how we think about traction. So like I said, sometimes we invest in very early stage startups where there may not even be a product yet. So we think about traction as evidence. We want to see that the founder has identified a significant pain point and gathered evidence that their solution is directly addressing this pain point. This evidence can come from product traction. It can also come from other forms of validation if there is no product yet. The other thing that I want to call out about traction is for us, rate of growth matters more to us than the actual number. So if you get, 5 users your first week to use your product, and that number triples every single week for many, many months, a 3x weekly growth for an important problem is more attractive to us than getting, thousands of users and then struggling to get any users after that first week. All right, the last thing that I'll talk about regarding what we look for is the application question where we ask you for insights. So in the application review process, we are trying to learn as much as we can from you. And we're looking for insights or specifically rare knowledge that you possess that very few others might know. We want to find capable founders who are informed about what they're working on. And some of the best founders that we've worked with have spent, significant time learning as much as they can about their industry, learning as much as they can about their users. And in fact, we have internal lingo and internal metrics that we use to talk about this, which is insights per minute. How many new insights can Sukan or Brian or our other venture partners walk away with after a phone call with you? If it's high, that's a good sign. You are the founder of your startup. And so we walk into these calls assuming that you're the expert of your startup, you're the expert of the problem, and you're the expert of your industry. If Brian or Sukan are walking away not learning much or not learning anything new, that's typically not a good sign. The other thing that I'll call out here is Brian and Sukan have been in this space for, quite a number of years. They started in San Francisco. They've been co-founders for, 19, maybe 20 years now. And I think maybe Sukan more than Brian, but both of them, and we can maybe clarify during Q&A, but I think they both believe that the next big thing is probably something that nobody has done before, or is a different solution to a problem that people have tried to tackle already. And so being contrarian, and believing something that others don't believe can be a good thing, especially if you have evidence to back you up. Okay, moving on to our top mistakes. So common mistakes that we see during the application process. I'll go through these pretty quickly since it's pretty straightforward. But one common mistake that we see is an application that is full of jargon and technical terms, which makes it really difficult for us to understand, especially if it's, industry specific. We definitely encourage you to try to use simple, plain language to describe your problem, describe the solution, talk about your business. Plain, simple language will help everybody who's reviewing your application learn as much as they can, as quickly as they can about you. The next common mistake that we typically see is problem statements that describe the solution instead of the problem. So if your problem statement is something like, we are working to develop an AI-powered chat box to handle customer service to improve response time, that is not really a problem statement to us. A problem statement would be, customer service teams are overwhelmed. The average response time has increased from 24 hours to 72 hours because of this. Customer service scores have dropped from, 85% to 65%, et cetera. We want a problem statement that's actually describing a problem before you talk about your solution. Another mistake that we commonly see, it's when we are asking founders for information and they're not able to recall key metrics off the top of their head. So as the expert of your startup and your business, you should be able to recall, number of users, number of weekly users, your weekly growth, your CAC, all these key metrics off the top of your head. And the last mistake that I'll talk about right now is what I call everything everywhere all at once, which is a fantastic movie, but not something that we want to see in founders. This represents founders who are trying to solve too many things all at the same time instead of focusing on one particular thing and doing that one thing really well. All right, moving on to our top 3 rejection reasons. So this is real data from our last pool of applications that we've received. So we had over 1,000 applications, and the number 1 reason that we rejected applications last batch was 16% of those applications did not have enough validation. So the founder may have talked to some people, they may have had some surveys, but they didn't quite dig deep enough to validate the problem and validate that people want the solution they are proposing. The second and third top rejection reason actually are tied with each making up 13% of our application pool last batch. So the first one is insufficient differentiation. We simply weren't convinced that the proposed solution that this founder was giving us was sufficiently different from existing solutions already in the market, and that we weren't convinced that they would be able to capture a significant share of the market. And the last reason was that the market is too small. So the market that the startup is in is not big enough, and may not be addressing an important enough problem using our language in order for it to be a startup that we are willing to back. These were the top 3 reasons that we rejected applications in the past. Just information for you to know as you are working on your applications for this batch. All right, and quickly before we move on to Q&A, we have a number of different resources that we've compiled for you. I'll just quickly run through these, and we'll share them in an email after the event today. So we have frequently asked questions. Definitely encourage you to read through these. It's just a list of commonly asked questions that we've received from founders in the past. We also have a guide to answering our application questions where we tell you exactly what we're looking for in these application questions. And then we also have 2 guides, which are very new, and I think Pranav is on the call. We have Pranav to thank for this. Getting into Iterative, which is a deeper dive into a lot of what I've talked about today. And then what happens at Iterative, which will help you learn more about the program, the value that we provide, our deal terms, benefits, and more. All right. Moving on now to Q&A. Okay, and we have our first question already popped up here. So if I haven't gotten into the program yet, how do you know that I am the founder who consistently executes? So this is just talking a little bit more about how we evaluate consistent execution.
Yep. Great question. I've thought about this quite a lot. I should write a blog post about it at some point. So there's a couple of ways that we can tell. And obviously, look, I'm going to talk to you for 30 minutes and I'm not going to know everything about you. I have to do my best to kind of like come to some conclusion or opinion, and I can 100% be wrong. I'm just going to say that right off the bat, right? So there are some people who I think consistently execute and they do not. And there's some people who I don't think consistently execute, and I'm sure they do, right? So I am not kind of like all-knowing. The way that I can kind of tell here is the first thing that I ask people is kind of like, okay, what is your goal? And if somebody doesn't have a goal, it's very unlikely that they consistently execute, because there's not like a thing that they're like executing towards. They're just like doing random stuff. And so that kind of disqualifies them. Okay, so let's assume they have a goal. Do they have a strategy for how they're going to meet their goal? Again, if you don't have a strategy, it's unlikely that you're executing kind of consistently. You're probably consistently doing lots of stuff, but I don't know if it's kind of going through the right direction. And then if they have a kind of strategy, do they have a plan on kind of like how they're going to execute on the strategy and all of those kinds of things? And if you don't have a plan, it's unlikely that you're going to be able to consistently execute. So I can kind of go down these different parts where it's like, okay, if they don't have a goal, probably don't execute consistently. If they don't have a strategy, probably don't execute consistently. If they don't have a plan, definitely not executing efficiently. So I can kind of go down through these checkpoints as a way to kind of like tell. And I think if you don't kind of have these things, it's possible that you are like, yes, you are probably working very hard, right? Consistently executing doesn't mean you're not working hard. You can work very hard, right? The thing I'm kind of checking for, though, is like, okay, is this person consistently kind of like meeting its goal, setting a new target? Okay, getting to the next one. Can they consistently do that? And so I kind of ask people these set of questions. And I mean, again, I was like joking, but I'm not actually joking. Like, I want to help you guys get into Iterative. Like, I'm going to ask you these set of questions basically, and like, you should probably have an answer, right? On kind of like, hey, where does your goal in the next month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever that is down the road?
All right, great. Thank you for answering and asking that. Next one, what is the range of market size that you see acceptable?
Ooh, I don't know. Market sizes are my least favorite thing of investors ever because they're all completely made up. And I guess this is my event, so I can swear if I want to. They're kind of bullshit. So, like, honestly, like, if there was an empirical, like, national, these are all the accurate market sizes, then maybe I would care a little bit more. But, you know, you say the market size for pet food in Southeast Asia is $1 billion. I think it's $100 million. Fight. Like, who knows, right? Um, and oftentimes what it comes down to is, well, what do you believe? Do you think there's going to be more pets in Southeast Asia? And if you do, okay, then $1 billion is probably more reasonable. And if you don't, then maybe $100 million is more reasonable. And these are all just opinions. So I think very hard to kind of answer this question. Um, the thing that I think you should focus on instead is kind of like, okay, do you think the problem you're working on is like sufficiently is like a important problem? And this is what Melissa was kind of talking about is, and the way that you want to think about this is, does it impact a lot of people? And for each individual person, is it kind of like very like is it a very strong kind of pain for them, right? So if it impacts a lot of people and you're solving a problem that is like very painful for each of those people, you're in really good shape. You can also make pretty good sized companies working on problems that affect a small number of people, but for that small number of people, it is like very, very painful. So that's also kind of reasonable. But we don't internally have kind of like a number that is like the market size needs to be at least $500 million in order to invest in it. And by the way, it also completely throws out like the really, really innovative ideas where there is like no existing market and so therefore no market size. So think about it in terms of kind of like important problems. Don't worry about the market size too much, at least for us. We don't care.
All right, I hope that is helpful. Moving on to the next question. Does Iterative invest in competitor companies in the same markets?
Yeah. Okay. So we used to kind of have a hard rule to not do this, but we've now invested in like 150 companies and it's getting very hard to like invest to like follow that rule. And so I think we've relaxed it a bit. The other thing that we find is we invest in very early stage companies. And so even though we invested in two companies that were not competing at the beginning, a year later, they are competing now. So there's only kind of so much we can do here. Okay, so what we try to do though is that we try to we try to kind of build some kind of reasonable walls between those. So if I work with company A during the batch, and then another company that is doing a similar thing and potentially could be competitive, I wouldn't work with them in the next batch. They would work with some other kind of partner, just so we don't kind of like are sharing these kinds of things. And you unfortunately have to take my word for it. We definitely don't kind of like share investor updates between the two companies. It's just morally kind of like wrong. And so we do invest, you know, but we kind of do our best to try to make sure that they have like an even level playing field and we're not trying to kind of like, I don't know why we would try to like poison one of our own companies, but yeah, we stay away from that. But this is kind of inevitable at our portfolio size.
All right, I think this is similar, but a little bit
Similar.
different. Yeah. Do
Yeah,
you find
similar. I mean,
similar?
if it's in different countries, it's a little bit easier to kind of invest because they're like different. But if they're in the same country, it's a little bit more competitive. We still might do it. We take this on a case by case basis, but we would still try to be careful and mindful.
Great. How do you measure the rate of growth for B2B solutions where the sales cycle are longer and sometimes as long as months?
The reason why I laugh is because everybody complains about their sales cycles being long, and to me that just means you haven't figured out your sales cycle. Like if you actually figure out your sales cycle, there actually can be quite short and even B2B kind of solutions. I think one mistake that founders make is they just assume the sales cycle is long, and so they kind of throw their hands up and they're like, "Oh, it's long. That's how it kind of is." It's just not true. And so to me, the first thing I would work on is I would break up your sales cycle into kind of the different parts, and then I would put growth rates on those parts. So I don't know, for example, like top of funnel kind of like leads, like inbound leads, you want to set some growth targets on that. That's like a thing you can kind of change more frequently. Same with kind of like, okay, we need to increase our conversion from first call to second call by this much. You can set a weekly target around that. So I would set up these kinds of like individual kind of checkpoints at the sales process. I would set targets for each of those. And if you kind of hit all of those kind of weekly targets, you should get kind of like more sales at the end of it. But I would absolutely, it is not a law of physics that B2B solutions have sales cycles that are months. We have some companies that have like really figured it out and they can do B2B sales in like days. So, but yeah, break it up.
Okay, next question. How can we define a market audience big enough to attract venture backing as a young startup with limited resources and a focus on a specific target audience?
You can't. There's no surefire way. There's not, right? We're all kind of making bets. And that's kind of like the tragedy and fun of startups where like, look, when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, he was so unconvinced by the potential of Facebook. He took 6 months off and worked on a completely different product called Wirehog. And then when that didn't work, he was like, yeah, maybe I'll work on the Facebook thing again. You can't define it. It is like an organic experiment that you're running in the world, and you are like hoping that it has like a big audience, but there's no way to like know for sure. There are things that you can do, which I think Melissa is running a validation program that we will plug here. But there's things you can do to gather evidence that suggests that the market might be big, but there is no way to know for sure until you kind of start working on it. All of my friends like on that slide who have started kind of billion-dollar companies, they will tell everybody in public that they knew from the beginning, and I can tell you right now they did not know from the beginning, and they didn't know until the moment that actually became a billion-dollar company. And even then they're like, ooh, I don't know if it's actually worth $1 billion. You just don't know. So the best you can do is try to gather as much evidence as you can at the stage that you are, that maybe what you're working on is going to kind of have a large audience, and then kind of just keep trying to gather more evidence and get to that next stage. Maybe I'll answer a somewhat separate question that I'm getting from this question that I think a lot of founders fall into. They think too much about the investor, right? You're like, oh, how do I define whether a market audience is big enough to attract venture backing? Screw venture backing. That's not the thing you should be worried about. The thing you should be worried about is that you are solving a problem for a large enough audience that it's going to be valuable and useful to them. If you do that, you will get venture backing. But venture backing is like the means to an end. It's not the end. And look, I say this as an investor. Like, honestly, if a company was making decisions based on whether it was going to impress me or not, I would not invest in that company. They're not going to make anything very useful, right? And so to me, I'm like, look, you focus on like working and making sure that you are building something that, like as YC says, that people want, and hopefully a large number of people want it. And if you're able to do that, you will get venture backing, no problem.
All right, hope that helps, Aaron. Thanks for the question. Next one. Is there a location constraint? I am located in India for now, but willing to move as needed.
Yeah, we only invest in startups in Southeast Asia. It's our fund mandate. That's what we told our investors that we are going to do. So they get upset if we don't invest their money in the places we told them we were going to invest their money. And right now the rule is you need to live in Southeast Asia, or you need your primary kind of like users and stuff need to be in Southeast Asia. I get this question all the time. Do not move for an investor, including me. Absolutely not. And a lot of people are like, oh, if you invest in me, then I'll move. No, 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 no. That's not how this works. You should move if you think it's in the best interest of your company and serving your users, and then you will let us know. But we don't we don't invest first and then people move. We don't do any of that kind of stuff. You should do what is in the best interest of your users and customers, your life, not us. And then, we can make a decision after that. Yeah, like what Leanne said, build something people want in a company you want.
All
We
right,
should put that
next
on a t-shirt.
question. Yeah. I've already launched the product. I got a few paying customers. I have one user who uses my product every week. Is this good enough traction for applying?
I have no idea. No idea, because I have no idea what you're working on. I get this question quite a lot. There's no magic number of like, oh, I have this much revenue. You will invest if I have this much revenue. And it's like, well, I mean, it depends. Like, I mean, I don't know. The toast box across the street probably has a certain amount of revenue, and there's no amount of revenue they can make that I'll invest in, right? And so it kind of depends. I think the way that you want to think about this is traction is evidence, like Melissa was talking about. And sometimes you need more evidence and sometimes you need less evidence. So if somebody was trying to convince me to invest and they had a cure for cancer, they need very little evidence about whether people are going to want that or not. I am very sure people want that. If you were trying to convince me that there's going to be a billion-dollar company in Singapore selling space heaters to heat their homes, you better have a lot of evidence to suggest that that is likely true, because I don't believe it. Right. And so there's kind of like two parts here. So sometimes I invest in companies with very little traction because I believe in what they're working on. I buy that this is a real problem. And by the way, it's again my opinion, like, not to say that I know everything, but uh, um, I guess I'm in a position to make these decisions, and so I kind of have to. But they don't have to show as much traction. There are some companies where I don't believe that what they're working on is a problem, and then they have to show me a little bit more traction to convince me. And sometimes that it is convincing, and that's very exciting. I'm always very happy to kind of like learn the world works in a way that is different from how I think about it. But that's how I think about it. So I have no idea. But good. I mean, awesome that you've launched a product. Awesome you have paying customers. That's like never a bad thing, but impossible for me to kind of say whether we would invest or not invest purely on it.
But would still encourage you to apply, and then you can get the
Yes.
answer.
Sorry, I'll get on this soapbox here. If your question is, I have this, should I apply? I don't have this, should I apply? Any versions of should I apply? The answer is you should apply. And the reason why I say this is because, and I'm working on a post for this. Applying to Iterative has the number of times you applied to Iterative before has no negative impact on the next time that you apply. In fact, when we looked at the numbers, the more it turns out, the more that you've applied to Iterative, the more likely it is you get into Iterative. And we didn't do this consciously, but the thing that I think when we saw that metric and we were surprised and we were trying to explain it, the thing that we came up with was it gives us a lot of data points having had a founder apply many times, and then we get to kind of talk to them during their journey and see how they progressed. And that tends to make us more comfortable with investing, because we were like, oh, this person like is resilient. We can see how they're making changes to their business. We're like getting all of these proof points. And so if you're on the offensive about applying, you should just apply. And worst thing that we can do is being like, hey, sorry, we're not going to invest this time. You should apply to the next batch. You can apply to every single batch as many times as you want. I think the current record is there was a company in our latest batch who had applied 5 times and then got into this one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And by the way, they're probably one of the strongest companies in the batch. I won't say who for all kind of a bunch of reasons, but like 5 times and then they got in. So.
All right, great. I think you already answered this question, Suken. I was rejected in pre-batch. I learned a lot from the process. Am I still eligible to apply again for the summer batch?
You're allowed to apply once per batch. And so if you applied for the summer batch, then I would kind of wait. If you were not sure whether you applied or which one you would, just apply again. Like, I'm sorry, Kathy and Mook, they will figure it out for you and let you know. But like, if you're not sure, just apply.
All right, next question. If you're pitching a concept without any working product yet, what's the best way to prove validation?
Customers. And I say this kind of jokingly because I'm like, you don't need a working product to like actually kind of get customers and get signups and all of this kind of stuff. So, I mean, you can sell a product before you've actually built the product. And so the best way to kind of validate it is to sell the product before you actually have it. I'm going to go find a Justin Kahn meme that he posted about this, but we can go on.
All right, moving on. Are you open for live practice now? I think it would be good learning for all of us. I am ready to give 3 minutes pitch and open for feedback.
No. We have some kind of like events for this, but not this one, unfortunately. So again, if you want feedback, just apply. Just apply. Also, Persona, we have a chatbot that apparently mimics me pretty closely, and so maybe that's a pretty good thing. But apologize, we can't do it during this event.
Okay, moving on, and I'll share the Persona link in the email after this as well. So an iPhone wasn't something people thought they wanted, but after Apple made it, everybody wanted. Where was the pain point in this case?
Oh, I mean, so easy. You didn't want a computer. You didn't like want to be connected to the like entire world from your like phone case. Like there's so many, think about all of the stuff that came as a result of the phone and having kind of that. It's like The pain point was taxis sucked. So iPhones, then Uber, then I could get this kind of stuff. So it unlocked a bunch of like stuff. And so I think connectivity is like a pretty clear kind of like pain point here, where it was like people could just like there was so much more that you could kind of like do, and you were unable to do it while you were kind of like on the go. And so maybe if I was going to articulate the pain point is there's a bunch of stuff that I can do on my computer. I would like to do it on my like on like while I'm walking around iPhone, basically. I mean, it's basically a computer in your pocket, right?
All right, I hope that helped. Next one, what kind of traction, so number of users, customer, DAU, MAU, et cetera, is decent enough for you to consider a startup for the program?
I've invested in a startup that was 2 weeks old and had absolutely nothing. So there is like no kind of number here. Again, like when I invested in that company, I really liked the founders. I thought that they were like really gonna like compelling. And I thought that they were like very high potential and I liked what they were doing. So they didn't have any traction or all this kind of stuff. So again, there's no kind of set numbers or anything like that. It depends on kind of what you're working on. So yeah. I mean, traction is always good. I would like encourage people to like try to get it. But it's not like prohibitive.
How important is the background or story of the founder for you?
Ooh, I guess it depends. Uh, it isn't. I don't care about what school you went to. I don't care about any kind of like nonsense like that. None of that kind of like matters to me. So I don't care about that. Um, there's obviously some cases where if somebody is, I don't know, like there was a company in the YC batch that we were in that was working on like nuclear fission. I can't remember which one. And like, okay, their background kind of mattered a bit because they were like PhD theoretical physicists. Like, okay, that matters when you're building a company like that. I can't build a company like that. I don't have any advanced degrees. And so maybe the way to answer this is I care about it from a practical standpoint in like, is it going to kind of like help you kind of like build your company? And that can only kind of really be plus points. It's rarely negative points to me. Like lots of people kind of start companies that they don't have experience in, so I don't think it's like a prohibitive thing. But it can help, but probably doesn't hurt. But we famously internally, like we just don't care about the typical things investors look for, which is like what schools you went to, did you work at some fancy company, call it like whatever. Like we don't care about that stuff.
Okay, I hope that is helpful. Next one, would a startup that is regionally expanding already more favorable, um, compared to a startup that is focused to grow locally at home market? Okay, so would a startup that is regionally expanding be more favorable than a startup that is focused on just growing locally?
Um, I think no kind of like general answer. I mean, I think it's kind of like more nuanced than that, right? So I'm gonna take this as I mean, it depends on what the startup is doing. And so one startup could be working. But so if they're working on kind of similar ideas, it depends on what the home market is, right? If your home market is Indonesia, you're probably in pretty good shape because that's a really big market. If your home market is Malaysia, and I'll just pick on Malaysia because I'm Malaysian, not so good, right? So I think it depends on who the home market is and that kind of stuff. But I don't know if regional expansion makes it more favorable than home market or anything like that. I don't think we I don't think we take this into that much consideration. I think we spend more time on kind of like, okay, is this problem kind of really important, kind of all of that kind of stuff. And I think it matters more kind of like who the existing market is, probably where they're going to expand to, what are competitive advantage. Yeah. Not so simple, maybe. It's not a simple answer here.
Does economic landscape affect the team's decision to make
Mm.
investments?
God, it probably should, but it does not. So here's what I mean. You can tell a lot about kind of, it's funny. You go to any kind of conference or any talk, and when the market was really cold, and you had every investor stand up there in a panel, and they're like, "Oh, the markets are really cold right now. Are you slowing down your investments?" And every investor is like, "No, we're not slowing down our investments. We're just as bullish as before." And then you go look at the number of investments they made, and they made like none, which I just think is hilarious. So, but I'm happy to say, if you look at our numbers, they have gone up. And so to us, I think, um, I'm guessing this is kind of like a question coming in like, hey, the economy's kind of slowed down a bit. There was a much slower period the last kind of like 2 years. Does that impact kind of like what we're doing? I actually think that this is the very best time to invest, and I am pushing the team to invest more if we possibly can. The reason why I think this is the best time to invest is a couple of things. One is I feel like the founders who start companies now are like the real deal. It's like the hype is like down, and the people who start companies and out of hype cycles are like the real deal. I think when during the hype cycles, people think that like starting a company is like a fast way to make money, which is it's not. It's like a horrible way to kind of like do that. And so there's too much noise. And then I also think that if you start a company now, you have to kind of fight tooth and nail for customers. And so you end up being very fit and you work yourself into that fitness. And when the market becomes like hot again, you're going to be super fit and the market is hot and you're going to crush. And so to me, I'm like, it doesn't impact kind of how our team thinks about it. If anything, it probably helps. I'm like more bullish about investing in companies now than I was kind of like when the market was like very hot. So yeah, I think it kind of just helps more than anything else.
Okay, great. This one seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
What are the investment terms and investment vehicle?
I won't go through all the deal mechanics here, but let me share this in the that will answer like every question that you have about kind of our deal. But it's modeled after YC safe. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And we will also share this in an email too, so you can have it with you. What's Iterative's experience investing in open source dev tools?
Ooh, open source dev tools. Asking for a friend, right? I think we haven't done a ton. I don't think there's a lot of open source dev tool companies in Southeast Asia. San Francisco, there was quite a lot, but there's less in Southeast Asia. I don't think we have anything against it. I mean, there's nothing inherently kind of wrong with investing in these companies to me. I just think we've seen less of them. So I think we have a few that we've worked on that are kind of like dev tools. I don't think they're open source, but we've invested in a couple of dev tools. But I'm like happy to see them, would love to see them. In another life, I was an engineer, so like very happy to kind of see dev tools. But we just don't see very many.
How important is the role that tech plays in considering whether you invest in the business?
This is quite important actually. It's funny. I feel like I'm just gonna like link people to like a bunch of stuff here. Um uh Here, let me this Paul Graham post probably is like a way better explanation of this, why it's important than me. But let me kind of like summarize. So when you are investing in yeah, there's the Justin Kahn quote. When you are investing in, so venture capitalists are looking for companies that are going to grow very, very large. And so the way that they need the companies to grow very, very large because most of the companies they invest in are not going to work and they're going to go to zero. So it's kind of like built into kind of like how investing works. Um, for a company to grow very, very large in 7 years, which is roughly kind of like how long our fund is. So, every 7 years, basically every time I raise money for our fund, we have 7 years until the investors expect to get their money back. And so I kind of need a company to grow very large in 7 years. You can argue it's dumb, whatever, but that's kind of the way the world works right now at the moment. For a company that does not have a lot of technology, it's very hard to grow very big in 7 years. So imagine that you are a company that sells hamburgers. Can you become $1 billion company in 7 years selling hamburgers? My answer is no, you can't. And the reason why is because every time you want to sell more hamburgers, you have to hire more people, you got to build more stores, you got to do all of this stuff. So there's like a natural limitation to the number of kind of like hamburgers that you can build, and you can get there over time. Obviously, it's McDonald's, but McDonald's has also been around for like 30, 40 years. Facebook and Instagram, I forget what the actual years are, but they could get to $1 billion in like 2 years. And the reason why is because every time they got a new user on Instagram, they don't buy and they didn't have to hire more people and they didn't have to build kind of like a new kind of building, right? It's like virtually the same. Yeah, they got to get couple more servers or whatever, but it's virtually the same. And so um technology allows a new class of business that has never been able to exist before, which is allows people to kind of like build these very big businesses very quickly because of the technology and kind of the internet. And so that's why venture capital kind of invests in them. They need that profile. And so that's why it's important. You just can't grow very fast otherwise.
All right, I hope that helped. Next one, how do you evaluate competitive advantage in the
Mhm.
AI space where tech is increasingly getting commoditized?
Oh God. If you have a good answer to this, come work for me. I mean, look, everybody's trying to answer this question right now, right? My kind of like take here is that um there's so much kind of like up for grab. I mean, the joke with kind of the Apple announcement with kind of like OpenAI and all that kind of stuff is like, the Apple's announcement killed 1,000 startups this morning, right? And so look, the only the only people that I think have a competitive advantage are OpenAI and people and Llama and the people actually making kind of those models. They have kind of like a competitive advantage because they're actually making it. Everybody that's building on top of them, you are kind of like at their whims a little bit. Um, and the only way that I think you can actually build a competitive advantage building on top of them is if you can collect specialized data that other people don't have. And at some point, if you can kind of like develop your own models, maybe kind of like on top of theirs or something that gives yourself some sort of edge. If your product is 100% on top of ChatGPT and primarily a wrapper, no new data, no proprietary data, you're not going to build any kind of like proprietary models on top of them or anything like that. I think that's a pretty commoditized kind of like business. Um, I was talking to a friend the other day, and we were making the joke that it used to be that there was a lot of companies that were Uber for X. Like in the valley, it was like running around. I was like, oh, this company's like Uber for, doing chores. It's called TaskRabbit, and this company is Uber for this. And I think the funny thing where it ended up is like the Uber for X ended up just being Uber in a lot of cases. And we wonder if that's going to be the case for OpenAI, where it's like, oh, it's like ChatGPT for X, and it's like maybe it just ends up being ChatGPT, right? So.
All right,
But tough.
yeah, doing a quick time check. We have about 15 questions left in the queue. Any questions that we don't get to live, we'll definitely answer, send it an email. But Sukan, do you have a few more minutes?
Sure.
Okay. We'll probably go over to about maybe 7:10, 7:15. Next question, do you think AI startups are simply hyped up right now, or do you believe in where AI is going?
I think both of those things can be true. I do think that they are hyped up, and I do think there's a kind of like I refrain from using the word bubble because I think it's like hard to define. But I do think that there's probably more AI companies that are uh, they're being overfunded basically than kind of like what it is. But I also kind of believe in AI kind of going both forward, so I think both are true. And by the way, I think this is totally normal and a natural market reaction to innovation. When there's a new innovation that comes out, people think it's going to change the world, and everybody rushes to kind of do something about it. And people will find out where the actual innovation kind of is, and people are placing their bets now by starting companies. So I think it's totally normal, total natural kind of reaction here. Um, I think that the way that I would think about it is AI to me is like any technology. I think about this with AI. I think about this with crypto. I think about this with the internet, whatever it is. Um, Technologists are people who build tools that are useful to other human beings. That is our job. AI is a new set of tools that seems very promising. Just like crypto was promising, like the internet was promising. It's a new set of tools. So you can imagine it's like, oh, I lived in a world where I only had a screwdriver. Tried to use the screwdriver to on nails. Didn't work that well. Okay, all of a sudden I got a hammer. Wow, this works way better on nails. I got a whole nother set of things that now I can kind of do a much better job of. Let me go see where this like thing called a hammer is useful. AI is the hammer. It seems like a very useful tool. It seems like it could be used in a bunch of places. I think people will find out that in some of those places, actually a screwdriver was just as good. We should go back to using a screwdriver. And I think in some places we're like, wow, I didn't think we could do this, but now that we have a hammer, we can do this. Um, and we can have a very long conversation about where those are going to be. But AI is just a new tool, right? It's a good one, all of that kind of stuff, right? These come along once every kind of like couple of decades and stuff, but like it's a new tool. We need to apply them to the right problems, that kind of stuff.
Okay, hope that helped. Next one, I got rejected because the market size is too small. This was
Yeah.
mentioned in the email, but you said you don't
Yeah.
really care about market size. Is there something
Yeah.
I'm missing?
Yeah, I mean, market size is shorthand. I think sometimes our team. By the way, I didn't write the email. You can if it was Mook or Kathy, uh you can message them right now in this chat. I think Mook is at least here. Market size is sometimes kind of like short for like I think our team uses it in short form for we don't think the problem is important enough. So we kind of use them somewhat interchangeably. So I don't by the way, I am also speaking on my behalf. I don't speak for everybody at Iterative. Iterative does seem to kind of be quite influenced by what I say, but like, it's, there could be other people at Iterative that think market size is more important. I don't think it's very important. I think a problem being important is kind of the thing we care about, but that's how I would translate it. If you got an email from somebody at Iterative and said the market size was too small, I would translate it as we don't believe that your problem that you're solving is large enough. Which again is an opinion. It could be large. We might be wrong. It's possible, right? But that's what we think.
All right, next question. Do you evaluate B2C companies and B2B companies differently?
Yes and no. No, in the sense that you're still solving problems for people. It's just sometimes you're solving problems for kind of like a company, and sometimes you're solving problems for consumers. So, no, we look at them same from that standpoint. But yes, in the sense that like, company problems and people problems are kind of different. So we look at that differently. Maybe the thing that I think is concrete example here, if it's a B2B company, we tend to look at revenue a lot more. If it's a B2C company, revenue is not something that kind of like happens that early. So it tends to happen later. And so we don't look at that as early. We look at growth, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of these things. This is not the question, but I think this is interesting. I think for a B2C company to be really large, it needs to be controversial. It needs to be a company where people are like, there's some group of people who are like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And there needs to be another group of people who gets it. B2B is the opposite. For a B2B company to be really successful, everybody kind of hears about the company and is like, yeah, that makes sense. Right. But if you have that for a consumer company, my thesis is that consumer company is going nowhere. If you think about the large consumer companies like Facebook or like take Snapchat. So you're telling me that a company that allows you to send photos to each other that disappear after 20 seconds is going to be like a $10 billion company? Like, I mean, people were making jokes about how stupid that was. And like, so to me, when I think about consumer companies now, I'm like, is there some group of people who just thinks this thing is really dumb? And if there is, then like I'm more interested in the B2C company. But yeah, so we think about it differently that way. I should write a blog post about that.
With more than 1,000 applications, how does the iterative team sort through them so quickly if it's all done manually?
Yeah, and by the way, I will repeat this because I think sometimes people don't believe they are legitimately sorted manually. Like we have an Airtable, Mook and Kathy go through every single one. There are no at the moment, I can honestly say this, there are no software filters that just disqualify people. There's absolutely not. The answer to this question is Mook and Kathy work very hard. And once you've kind of seen so many applications, you get pretty good at kind of sorting them pretty quickly, and you're making very kind of quick decisions on it. Would I like to spend 2 hours on every single application to make sure that they like, I think all the way through and all that kind of stuff? Totally. If I spend 2 hours with every application for 1,000 applications, that's 2,000 hours, and I basically won't do anything else. And so unfortunately, that initial review that Mook and Kathy does are done quite quickly, and they are kind of like fine-tuned. They're very fine-tuned to kind of like make these decisions, and honestly, they do a pretty good job. But that's the only way to do it. They go through it. They know what they're looking for. Yeah, we go through them.
All right.
By the way, like half the applications come at the application deadline, so it's not even 1,000 applications spread out over like 3 months. It's like 500 applications spread out in like 3 weeks. And we've pulled kind of like application review parties where basically it's like all weekend we literally are just like in the Airtable, just like looking at reviews and being like, okay, let's talk to them. Okay, send me some questions, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're working really hard now.
Yeah.
All right, next one. What kind of founder or what specific thing in a founder really excites you? How do you judge a founder during an investment call?
Okay, the thing that really excites me is two things. One is I really like founders who know something that I don't know or have some contrarian opinion that I do not have. And what I mean by this is like, I think the world works a certain way. And if a founder believes the world works in a different way and is convincing about that, and I come out of that call being like, oh, maybe the world does work that way. That's like really exciting for me because I feel like it like changed. I mean, literally changed my worldview. And so I think that's kind of like quite exciting. The other thing that I really like too is there is a set of founders where they are like, they are such nerds about their startups. And what I mean by that is, um, I will like poke holes at their thing. I'll be like, hey, so why do you believe like XYZ? Or like, I'll be like, hey, why aren't you growing faster or something? And then they literally get excited. They're like, oh, okay. So I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Okay, so here's the what's going on. And they talk really fast and they're super into it. And the reason that I like that is that uh they are people who are like, they really enjoy the process of building a startup. And so they're just like nerds about it. Right. And they get so excited. If you ask them a good question, they're really excited to talk about it because like being a founder is kind of lonely. And so they're like, oh my gosh, somebody asked me the question that I think about all the time. Let's have a conversation about it. They're like super excited about it. The founders that are less exciting is I ask them some question and it's just like, it's like a school test. It's like I told them there was a pop quiz and they're like, oh God, I didn't study last night. Right. Um, but I really like founders who are just like, they're just excited to talk about what they're doing and they're excited to talk about kind of like what's challenging about it, what are they going to do, all of that kind of stuff.
Okay, I hope that helps. Whoever submitted that. Next one. Have you ever rejected a candidate even when the traction looks good?
100%. I have rejected companies that make over $1 million in revenue. Yes, absolutely. Maybe I'll kind of give kind of like context here. We often will reject startups that kind of like potentially making kind of like millions of dollars in revenue. The reason why we do that is because two things. One, they're not growing, and so it seems like they are a good business by all accounts. I mean, you're making a couple $1 million. You're in like a pretty good business that seems to have hit their ceiling. And for investors, we're looking for companies that are able to grow. And so that kind of be the thing. And then two, sometimes we look at companies and they might have a lot of revenue and a lot of traction, and they may even be growing reasonably fast, but we just don't believe that there's much more room for them to grow into. And so again, if somebody was like, I make $1 million and I sell space heaters in Singapore, I'm like, I'm super impressed you can make $1 million selling space heaters in Singapore. I don't think you're getting to 10 million, right? So I think that ends up being the case. But yes, we've totally done this.
What if I'm building a product for a topic that has only now started to gain awareness in the Southeast Asian market? What would you need to believe in the idea?
The first thing that comes to mind is this is like all mental health startups. I feel like they're like all in this bucket where they're like building and stuff. I think awareness in Southeast Asia around mental health is still kind of like pretty weak. But we can make an argument it's getting better. What do I need to believe? I need to believe that what they're working on is starting to gain awareness, and it is going to gain a lot of awareness in the next couple of years. And so I want to hear the argument, right? So like let's take uh, uh, mental health as kind of an example here. Um, I come in with kind of my preconceived notions about whether I think it's going to come first, right? So that's kind of one place I come in with. And then the founder has some thesis on kind of like why it's going to kind of grow in Southeast Asia, why it's going to grow quickly, why is now the right time to kind of do that. And so I would want to understand why they believe in what they believe in, and have a lot of questions and conversations around that. If I feel like their argument is well founded and their thesis is well founded, then I mean, that's a pretty good place to start. And if I don't, then I think that's a difficult place to start. The well-founded theses tend to be more specific, and they tend to show some sort of kind of like insight into kind of like an observation on kind of like what's happening. If somebody was like, mental health is going to rise in Southeast Asia, and I'm like, okay, why? And they're like, it's good for people. I'm like, it's true. So is eating broccoli. Doesn't seem like a lot of people eat that much broccoli, right? So like you got to kind of do a little bit better than that right now. A better thesis would be like, okay, I think mental health is going to rise in Southeast Asia because we've seen that as Southeast Asia develops, the countries develop, we see an increase in kind of like people's willingness to kind of pay and importance of mental health in developed countries relative to developing countries. So we think it's a phenomenon as a result of developed countries. We think Southeast Asia is going to reach that development stage at some point. The primary thing holding back Southeast Asia right now is access to good quality psychiatrists. We're going to help bring that on, so on and so forth. I just made all of that stuff up, but like you can see how that's much more grounded in kind of like, okay, here's what we think, here's the reasons why, here's how the mechanics work.
Okay, I hope that was helpful. Next one, if there's more than one founder, do they all need to be working full time on the startup to get funding?
If you are a founder that is not working on it full time, I do not consider you a founder. So if there's one founder and 3 part-time founders, I think in my head there's one founder. So yeah, to me there needs to be at least one full-time person, because then there's no founders by my definition. But as far as I'm concerned, if the only people that are working on it full-time are founders. If there's 4 people who are quote unquote founders of a startup and they all have equal shares in the startup, but only one of them is full-time, I probably stay away, because I'm like, ooh, that's going to be a disaster, because not all of them are going to go full-time. If you are the person where you're like, oh, definitely all of my people are going to go full-time, I'm going to caution you against that, because that is not my experience having invested in a lot of startups. It's rarely kind of the case. Um, they don't all need to be, but I'm going to only count the founder that's full-time as a founder.
All right, what is more important to you, founder or the problem? Do you accept a good founder with a not so big problem over an average founder with a bigger problem?
Yeah, we debate this a lot internally. So I think it depends on like the stage of the company. So for very early, okay, maybe I'll explain it this way. All startups are bound by their problem. And so again, if you're selling space heaters in Singapore, your company will only ever be as big as people that want space heaters in Singapore. And so you're always going to be bound by that. Um, so I think long term, the problem matters more than the founder long term. In the very early stage, like if I'm investing in a company that like doesn't have anything, the founder is more important, because the honestly, they're probably going to change the problem that they're working on. Um, and so to me, I'm like, okay, in that case, I think the founder is more important. So very early stage, the founder is probably more important. And then as the company matures and later stage, it probably is the problem ends up being more important. Um, I think what we like to do is for very early stage, we try to get a sense of the founder, but we want to have some directional belief in the problem. Like again, if it's a really good founder and they're just working on some idea that I just think is so dumb, then like there's kind of like no hope. They need to be in the ballpark of an important problem at the very least. But look, we've all been Brian and I have been founders before. I understand how this works. Like you're sometimes just like in the ballpark. You like don't really know what the problem is. You don't really know what you're going to like be doing 6 months from now. And so we like to we'd like to invest in a good founder who is like in the ballpark of an important problem.
Okay, next one. Um, do we have to register for a corporation before applying to Iterative?
No, you do not. Um, uh, uh, we have definitely invested in startups that have no incorporation, then we help them incorporate, and then we invest in them. So no.
All right, great. And I think we're entering the speed round now. The rest of the questions seem like they're
Speed
pretty
round.
straightforward. Yes. Do you have an upcoming class on validation? I did not
I'll
plug
let
it.
you take this one, Melissa.
We do have an upcoming class. Let me drop the link into the chat if you want to sign up. The program starts next week. Is a 2-week validation program. We'll have open office hours with Sue Ken every Thursday for the next 2 weeks. A lot of good content. So you can sign up for that here. We started outside of Southeast Asia, and now we are expanding into Southeast Asian regions. Would that be eligible for Iterative?
Tricky to kind of say, because it's probably, if you're just expanding here, your primary market is probably not here. So probably not, but again, just apply. We'll sort it out. I mean, again, human beings see all of your applications, and so we can kind of like make a call. By the way, this is like a really interesting thing. Maybe this is just like life advice for everybody. I think it's really interesting. People self-reject themselves so much in life, and it never made sense to me. Like, make somebody reject you, right? Like in this case, don't reject yourself. Just make me reject you, right? And like you just I think a lot of times people reject themselves when the other person maybe would not have rejected them. And so my like rule now is like I never reject myself. I just force people to reject me. And I don't know. I feel like I'm better off this way. So you should just apply.
Hmm. If we have our headquarters in Southeast Asia, but we have a larger target market in outside of Southeast Asia, would that not make us eligible?
No, I think again, if founders are kind of like in Southeast Asia, we're good. So yeah, I think you're fine. But again, just apply.
What are the most common rejection reasons?
Melissa had this in her slide deck, right?
Yes. For last batch, and I think this has been a common theme. The top reason was not enough validation. Second reason was not enough differentiation. And the top third reason was market size was too small. So we didn't think it was an important enough problem.
Maybe I should make the team change what they say.
Yeah. How much equity are you taking from the 500,000? How does your valuation process look like when you invest upfront?
Roughly 10%. The valuation process is basically you negotiating with Brian. And I say this kind of like, honestly, there's like no magic formula. There isn't like a formula that is like, ooh, startup is worth this much based on like revenue. That is more true for later stage startups where it's like a multiple in revenue, but for early stage startups, it's often not revenue at all. And who knows? So valuations, we tell our companies this, valuations are whatever somebody is willing to give you. So if you can get an investor to give you a higher valuation, that's what your company's worth. And if you can't, then it's not worth that much. So there's no kind of magic here, but we shoot for about 10%.
All right. And I think this is the last question. Is there a preferred template or length of document to use in the application?
No, not really. I mean, I think you can just fill out the form. So there's like a form online. Honestly, you can just answer the questions, like just treat it like a form, answer the questions, and like that's perfectly fine. I think there's a way to do it where you kind of like give a pitch deck, and that's also kind of fine. So those are the two typical ways to kind of like do it. I do find that people that write the answers to the questions probably do a little bit better because I mean, those are the things that like we kind of care about, and people who are able to kind of like write their thoughts tend to kind of like do a little bit better, but it's not, it's not prohibitive. We invest in plenty of companies that like just give us a pitch deck. So either of those is fine.
All right.
No special templates.
Yes. And I think that is a wrap for us today. We appreciate everybody who've stayed on to listen to us. We are 16 minutes past the hour. We are recording this. I'll share it out tomorrow with additional resources for you to go through, but appreciate your time. And we hope to see your applications to learn a little bit more about you and the startups that you're working on.
And everybody who is watching this recording and did not stay on, we do not appreciate you. So you should have stayed on, but it's okay. You can still apply.
I will edit that out.
Okay, good.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
All right. See you, everybody. Thanks.